Hello and welcome to this presentation of the Riftspark Traveler's book game. It's not going to be a presentation about the final game. This is actually an in-development presentation video with me, Kevin, the developer behind the game, going into details on how these first 3 months of development has been. We're going to look into some concept art and other things that has kind of been put into the game. The game has at this point been made into an early playable alpha demo that some people had got to test. I've gotten some great feedback from that already, and there's a lot of bugs that I have to look into and fix further up ahead. But with that said, I'm going to try to give you a brief rundown on what has been concluded during this development period. And without being too formal, I've tried to put together this presentation that is going to be lengthy from what I know. It has around 50 slides. Shh, you didn't hear that. Yeah, there's a few slides, and I'm also going to step out of these slides and jump into sections where we actually are going to be in the softwares themselves and look at certain things. I want to try to be as detailed as possible so that some of you who are watching this video might even pick up on some things and try to learn yourself. With that said, let's look into the contents. So we first have the introduction, which is going to be this first part of the video. We have the story, we're going to jump into the design, we're going to look into programming, graphics, audio and music, all of the very fine components that kind of makes and breaks a game. Some section of these, as I mentioned, is going to be in the other softwares. For example, the graphics and animation, we're going to take a look into Unity, and we're going to take a look into Maya, where the animations have been made. In terms of audio, we're going to take a look into FMod, the middleware software I'm using to implement sound, and in terms of music, we might even take a look into Ableton Live, the software I'm using for putting music together. But first of all, let's take a look into the introduction and give you a brief rundown on the background and concept of the game. So when we look into the background, what is Riftspark? Well, Riftspark is supposed to be this tribute game to a childhood that I had in the 90s. I'm born in 1991, so my first ever console was the Nintendo 64. Me and my brother played that a lot, and we had this one favorite game that was Banjo-Tooie, as you see here. I have also written that I'm heavily inspired by that. And Ratchet & Clank, Donkey Kong 64, and also some World of Warcraft that I started playing further down the line. I think it was in 2009 or something where Cataclysm came out. This is the very core material that started the idea in my head when it came down to Riftspark. I had these games that I really liked and loved from my childhood that I want to try to bring alive again, but with a twist, with something else from the modern age. So in the game, we can collect things in the world to unlock new areas and abilities, meanwhile learning more about Chip's background and his family. An ancient darkness looms in the distance, and it will be soon revealed that Chip's fate is much more tied to a destiny than he'd like to know. I'm not going to go into details on this, but if some of you noticed a little thing with the text, you kind of, you know, managed to put two and two together. So the development tools that I've been using for developing this game are the list here. We have Adobe Illustrator, we have Photoshop, Ableton Live as mentioned, Maya, 3D Studio Max, ZBrush, and we're also using FMod. I'm recording this currently with the program Action with expression mark to the right. We're using Substance Painter a little, and we're also putting everything together in the game engine Unity, which has been my tool of the trade when it comes to development. So let's take a brief look into the story, shall we? Or should we dive deep down? I'm not sure. This is a nicky part, but I'll be honest. If you thought that I'm going to spoil the narrative for the game now, when you even heard about what the game is supposed to be, you're off the charts. That's not going to happen. I do have a lot that I'd like to tell you about the game narrative, but I'm going to leave it out for this video for obvious reasons. But further down the development line, I'll be glad to give you a really deep dive into the actual storyline of the game and what's going to happen as we travel around in this unknown world. Or is it unknown? We don't really know. Or maybe we think it's unknown until we realize things about it. With that said, Chip, however, I'm just going to give you a very brief rundown on him so we kind of have this out of the way. Chip is our protagonist in the game. He is a goblin, as you might notice by the aesthetics. He is an orphanage from his childhood. He has no memory of his parents. However, he used to go to his grandparents' home, which is this mill that is located somewhere in a zone that is called Windrun Meadow, which is going to be the very first zone that you actually come into when the game is finally released. In terms of background, I'm not going to tell you too much about Chip himself, but what happens is his grandparents pass away. So he inherits this mill after them, and with his summer childhood memories from the mill, he kind of, comes from his orphanage lives and try to settle down and, get life working. Around the mill there is landscapes with fields, and, he can harvest and cook food and all of the things that you might need to keep yourself sustained. So he's more than fine living around that mill, but there are things about the mill that Chip has no idea about and that you're, as a player, gonna find out. So, looking into the design of the game, we have to ask ourselves 3 questions, and these questions were very prominent when I was developing this game. What can I do? And this is about what I can do, like what tools of the trade do I have? How can I put things together? How much do I know about putting things together? And then put 1 and 2 together to make the next section of the question. What can I learn to do? And I have to be honest, I had to learn a lot, especially in programming. That was my weakest point in this. But luckily there is a lot on the internet to find in terms of learning, and if you're just in there to learn, you're gonna learn a lot, I'll tell you that. And then what is there time to do? Now, I'm developing this game by side also doing my thesis work, which is a game development with VR. Next to that, I'm doing pilot studies in a research course. I'm also developing this other game in the background that is going to be aimed at summer now, 2018. It's just a little small application, but still, it has to be made. I'm preparing artwork and stuff for events. So Riftspark has kind of come into this area of either it squeezes things away from my time, or it kind of gets pushed away from my time itself. So thus, it's not super easy to manage it all the time, but I've done what I can, and I'm pretty happy with the results that's come so far over the 3 months of development that has been occurring. So, when it comes to gameplay mechanics and design, you start to list a lot of things that you would like to work. For example, in the name of the character, if we list and look at the basic interactions here, I'd like him to be able to run, turn, jump, fall, feint, ride a bike, rummage. I named that scramble in the alpha. I'll go over that in a later point. But also attacking, and when it comes to attacks, how many attacks do you want to have? What do he do during the attacks? What are they good for? What are they not good for? How do they look? What do they do? Yeah, I said what do they do twice there, but you get the idea. Like, there are many questions you have to ask with each one of these sections that kind of results into what they result in terms of programming, visual representation, and just generally how you want the interactions to go down when put into the environment of the world. In which cases are they supposed to be doable, for example. You also have the gain and lose health, and of course a lot more. But that is just in the main character himself. Then we haven't started going into all of the rest in the environment. So we have the camera. You want it to be able to turn, zoom. I want to clamp it to location, which means that you kind of like lock a camera in a certain position in the world. That is good if you have cameras you want to be static, that looks at a certain area of a zone permanently from that location. You can clamp them there. Activatable, deactivatable. You want to be able to swap to another camera, for example, in the world. I also want them to be able to collide with non-see-through objects, so that when Chip is behind a wall, the camera would snap to the side of the wall that Chip is currently located at, so that we can see him. And in terms of the elevator and lift that is not in the alpha but has been made, that thing has to temporarily bind a specific object to its surface and then move itself between a set amount of destinations. Now, there are currently 2 destinations, I think, in that version, but I've also made a lift script that has 5 set locations that it travels between, and one that randomizes between the set locations. And knowing what you want to do with an object like the lift, for example, kind of helps you put together what you'd like the gameplay to be like. Do you want the player to wait for something, or to take the chances or risk? Or do you want them to be annoyed by time? Or do you want to stress them out by having something they're running or fleeing from? and this thing is not shown up yet, or is it too quick? Can't they catch it in time because it's this thing that just comes by and leaves instantly? So such things has to be taken into consideration when you're putting this together too. What do you want each thing to do? So yeah, it kind of brings us to this slide. What should happen, when, and why? So let's take, for example, one of the attacks. The way I've made it currently is if a weapon strikes through a target, and this weapon has a collider box on it with a trigger. What that means for you who are not doing the game development is that this sword knows if it's in something else by that target saying, I have a sword in me. And in that case, the target should fall asunder and despawn. And all of those things come in different orders. It shouldn't despawn before it has fallen asunder because you want it to want to see it fall asunder. Should it be lying on the floor for a few seconds before it despawns? How should it despawn? Should it just disappear? Should it blink back and forth for a while before it despawns, or should it fade out so that it slowly fades out of the vision? Or should it sink through the floor? There are many things that could happen when you want something to do something in the game world, and in this case there were a lot of decisions for each of these steps that has to go down. And for the second example, if we are rummaging through the bag, we should be unable to move meanwhile, which means that if we're in the bag rummaging, we should be locked from any other kind of movement. However, it should also grant us the access to super cool special abilities. So while rummaging, sure, we are more targetable by hostility. However, we are much more likely to perform something epic while we're in the bag. For example, in the bag, you have the motorbike. So if you're holding down and rummaging, once you pick the motorbike hotkey, you'll be able to ride the motorbike. So that's a cool thing that you can only do by picking it up from the bag. But that's how it's supposed to work. And what can you look forward to then when it comes to the mechanics and the design of the game? Well, in store for chip, I've made powerful energy weapons, magic spells. There's a rocket-powered jump that has to go with the bag, for example. There's this mysterious book. I'm not going to tell you too much about it, but there is this mysterious book in the world. Mysterious book, I have to repeat it thrice, because that's the rule of 3, the magical rule of 3 that goes into storytelling. We have armors, we have upgradable abilities, and a lot more. These things are partially in development. Some of them are sort of done but haven't been given graphical assets, so I haven't been able to put them into the alpha, but they're there, they're ready for it, more or less, some of them at least. And in terms of the world, there are going to be many upon many destroyable things. The reason why only the cactuses in the world are currently destroyable, and the only thing that actually is destroyable in the world, is because I haven't had the time to put together more graphical assets, because for each destroyable thing, you need to have this one object that is a solid thing, and one version that is the destroyed version. And then you apply physics to the parts of the destroyed version, which makes it collapse or fly away or scatter when you strike it with something. And how that works is something you have to kind of, decide for yourself when you're developing the game. And in my case, I wanted the cacti to just fall asunder down on the ground. In some cases, you might actually be able to nick a piece away with your sword so it flies off into the distance. But yeah, that is how one of the things could happen. There's going to be monsters and bees, and I say bees, yes, because in the Windrun Meadow, the first zone, there's actually this large area of beekeepers, and these bees are not too friendly, but the beekeepers are, so you're going to have to go there because there are some things you'd like to know about your ancestry and stuff that some of the beekeepers know about, at least a little bit, they think. But the bees, they don't really see your presence in the area as wanted. Maybe due to something that your family have done. We'll see about that. There are also going to be mechs, which are controlled robots for those of you who don't know what mechs are, and other vehicles. I'm not going to tell you too much about that, but there's this weird section of the game that I'm really looking forward to developing that kind of starts to go off-world. Yeah, I'm going to leave that in there and not tell you too much more. NPCs, of course, with voices, and there's going to be much more story content because currently there is no story built into the alpha, for example. And that is not due to the fact that it's not being written. There is a lot of story written, but it just hasn't been put together in a way that it makes sense currently, and thus I've waited with putting any story content in. And the alpha itself is more a gameplay experience that has to do with interactions rather than what actually goes on. And I'd like the story to come together and be presented in a much more appropriate manner, and not to just reveal it piece by piece, but kind of give you a large chunk here and there. The actual zones in the world of Riftspark is going to come together as well in the future. There is going to be this jungle, there's going to be this desert biome. The desert is going to be really hostile. It kind of connects to a canyon and a cave system as well that has some weird glowy crystal things going on. You'll try to figure out more about that. Bosses and cutscenes and so much more that I'd like to tell you about, but I'll have to leave that out for the future of the development. This might be half a year down the line, 1 year down the line, but all of these things are going to come into the game. Mark my words on that. So, programming, that one thing that has taken the most amount of time, I think, when it comes to the development. I didn't think that programming itself would be so much of a hassle as it has been, but it might also be to the fact that when I started, I had literally no previous skill. I mean, I knew minimal amounts of Java, minimal amounts of C#, and minimal amounts of C++. I've done 2 courses in Java at college with a teacher who did what we call the one-finger waltz, basically putting one finger down on each key so that you could clearly and loudly hear the keys getting tapped down. And he wasn't very good with computers in general. He was like an industry programmer who did Java for machines, but the way that he produced and told us in the classroom was not very helpful. And I think most of us in college as well were speedy and not too interested, had a tendency to lose interest very early on into the lectures, and with him as well, sitting there at his computer, tapping away one key at a time, and also exclaiming the expression, looky here, but in Swedish, and mumbling. It just made the experience worse, and I myself, even though I got through the courses, had a really hard time memorizing anything that I did in them, so I kind of like put just minimal effort into getting through the courses, and that was a bad decision, because now I realized how much I would have had use of that experience. So I tried to backtrack and learn as much as possible in this development period. And I've also had one course in C# audio implementation in now in uni. I think it's the 2nd year when I took audio development. Yeah, I should have been there. We did some graphics implementation as well, some of us who wanted to play around with the game and experienced and experimented with Unity a bit. And then in my spare time, of course, I've also tested around a bit. So I had some basic Unity implementation knowledge and very basic C# variable cunning. So, what did I need to learn? Apparently a lot. I'll tell you that straight away. Not just the functions, but also the very basics. There was a lot that I've completely forgotten about Java that was really close to how C# worked. But in general, I mean, yes, of course, this game is developed in C#, so I'm not sure why I'm talking so much about Java. I might confuse you, but the general experience was that it was really difficult to get into the programmer's mindset. I am a creative guy, and the programmers had to think logically about every decision they put down. So jumping into the programmer's experience kind of forced this different mindset that didn't kick through after a while, and then suddenly it just snapped. But luckily I found 2 really helpful developer guided playlists on YouTube, and one of them is Game Plus James. I can really recommend that guy. He also does game jams once in a while and shows off indie games that his fan base develops and presents and kind of plays together and has these live stream sessions with them. And also Brackies. Brackies is really great when it comes to going deep down into tutorials. Now I've looked at these 2 videos, like these guys' videos, back and forth, and then also made my own mindset on how I wanted to solve certain things. So when it comes to programming, not everything is clear from the get-go. You might want to take a different approach when you reach a certain situation where maybe the solution that someone else has presented is not exactly what you'd like your own solution to be, and thus picking bits and bobs from certain scripts and trying to figure out a solution of how I'd like to do it in between there has led to a lot of cunning that I didn't think was possible, but now in with the programmer's mindset, there is a lot more that I actually understand about how certain things come together, and I'm really happy for having done that. So this has been a great experience so far. So let's see here. Right, as I mentioned, it took me some time, and a few weeks is not an understatement actually before it clicked. My girlfriend can definitely thumb this up. She's seen me sit in frustration and try to figure things out, and afternoons has bypassed with a lot of frustration. However, it's been really great due to the fact that the cunning and experience that I brought out from this product has led to a lot of other fun things now that I can do down the line with other projects that I'm really happy about. So yeah, that's good. And what I can summarize is that the best way to learn was to keep it tidy and make sure to comment on everything I wrote, to always be able to quickly understand what a segment of the script does. I'm going to show you in the next slide coming up here, but what I can conclude is learning by doing equals doing wrong equals learn. And you do a lot of wrongs, but holy God, the doing wrongs is what actually makes you understand what you're doing. And by doing it correctly, you never really understand what a thing does, because doing it wrong forces you to think around it, find a solution, or just get down exactly what a certain part of a script does. So if we take a look at the player's footstep script here, for example, this is just a very small section of it that says if this object that we're putting this script onto has a collider box, which is, well, how would I explain that for someone who's not a developer in a formal way? Imagine there is an invisible box around something, and if you enter this box like a personal space, something is supposed to happen. And in this case, it says on trigger enter. This box is a trigger, so it's not something that we collide with. We can go into the box, it's not visible. And then when we enter the trigger, something happens if the thing that goes into the trigger is named a certain thing. And this box is located on the player's foot, I think it is. Yes, that's the thing. And this is the box that when going into the environment, when this box passes into the environment, when the player is putting his foot down, it actually plays this sound effect and a particle system that kind of looks like dust coming off of the ground. So that is how I solved that. The reason why I did it that way instead of putting it in an animation, like some of you would have recommended me to do, is that would force me to take so many of my animations and add that footstep keying component that I thought it was just easier for now to build it into the actual character itself. But later down the line, I'm going to go into and key the actual print itself when the footstep is a certain position in the animation. And if we then look at the player's camera, oh my god, I remember this script. This script was made to compensate for the zoom distance when the camera hits the wall. So this is basically a small component that is a script that helped the camera know when it was close to a wall and then move it to a position that was away from the wall so that the camera would not be in the wall, for example. So this is how the camera is currently traversing the environment whenever you're close to a wall and such, so that the camera doesn't clip through a wall. This is like this compensator that in the end, it just pushes the camera closer to the player. And this is my theory behind how that was supposed to work. You have the main camera in an object that's called the main camera controller, and there's a shaker on that, so we can shake the camera with environment effects around it. And then we had certain variables around that. We had a minimum zoom and a maximum zoom. If we reached the minimum zoom, then the offset was supposed to negate the distance between the minimum zoom and the player. That distance, it was supposed to then move the camera if we were close enough to a wall. So we had this distance we could zoom with a scroll wheel, and then we had this little last distance that pushed the camera away from any object they collide with, so it's closer to the player character. Now, I'm not going to go into more details on that, but for those of you who have kind of figured out how I did it, you might think it's an okay solution. It's probably not the best, but it works for what I wanted to do at least. And it was an okay experience. It was fun to try to break this puzzle. So then we look at the biggest script I have in game, and this is the player controller script. Now there is a bit of a miscopy down at the bottom, so the camera interactions are as well on the next image. And why I say the next is because these are just the variables in the beginning of the script. These are booleans, these are float values, and such. As you see, just mainly booleans and float values, and some animator, like an animator or controller or transformer, vector 3, some particle systems, some game object. But what these do is kind of like some of them tells the script if a certain thing is a way or another, like is this true or is this false. Some of them are taking a game object and says if this game object is in that location, do this, or if it's facing that way, do that. But these are things that you put together and use in the script before you actually write the final script itself, the script that says what to do. These are just the things that you need to say with the script how things are supposed to be. So in some cases, for example, the blue text ones we can see are the character controllers. To the left, the game object and animator are things that exist in the game that you tell with the script to do things. And in the other case, you have these float values, for example, that are below that. That's header forces. These are values that are going on in the script and outside of the script that we can access from other scripts that go up and down depending on certain things. Some of them are clamped and can't be changed. And they are there to help give information about what's going on with the character at that given time. So now we're jumping into the graphics part. We have already been going for about half an hour. It's incredible. I'm hoping that you're still with me in this part of the video, because this is going to be the nifty-gritty part. I am not a fan of hastily made art assets in general, but sometimes sacrifices can be made to convey a larger picture within a set time frame, and I have to stick to these words as a creative artist. And I think that all of you who are doing something creative out there, like music, other kinds of audio, arts and stuff like that, you know that non-depending on how much you try and how much time and effort you put into something, you're never going to feel finished. Sometimes you just have to kind of wave your babies goodbye, leave them be for the better good of the product. And that is just how things work. But yes, with that said, I'm not a fan of having to quickly get through things that could be so much better if I put time and effort into them. But graphics is going to be that one thing that proves, when we look into the concept art, how much in comparison to how little you can put time into something and still come across with the very same result. So we're going to take a look at Chip to begin with. This is his old look. To the left there you have this image that I made for no apparent reason whatsoever, more than just trying to put him into a scene and an environment where I kind of could play around with the colors and see what he'd fit with. I'm not sure that that was the best way to go at it, but it was certainly fun those minutes I worked on that piece. To the right, on the other hand, you can see his very early concept art down to the very bottom with some hairstyles and stuff like that. The same picture as to the left to the very right, that is just being shaded in a different way. And then a 3D version at the top. The 3D version is actually the one that became made afterwards. But if we look at these pictures, there are things that are different in terms of how I approached him. For example, to the left, I have these weapons or this kind of wrench-like mace thing that I have no idea if I was going to use in the end, but I started to try out and come up with a concept for something that it could be the weapon he would be holding. Now, at this point, I know there's going to be so many more weapons than one and so many more looks than one that itself is probably not going to cut it with a deal of what the rest is going to be like. You can also see the shoulder piece here to the right that I had in this version for him that could have an open lid or a closed lid, and there was like this compass inside. There was also early days about pickups, some kind of animated stone portal thing, some torches and stuff like that. And when we jump forward, we take a look at the new character concept for Chip, which was mainly just an idea about having these wrapped feet, the wrapped hands, and then this big ol' flush hair on the head. I'm not sure if flush was the actual word I was looking for there, but yeah, this ponytail. Yeah, that's the word. Not sure why I said flush. But yes, the ponytail on his head, I wanted to have that and bring that into his character and kind of making a bit more piratey in the look. And why? Will be revealed further down the line. But yes, I wanted to have that, this aesthetic, this more pleasing, upright, proud character rather than the hunched over, really quirky, down in this lab playing around goblin-y character. This guy is supposed to feel a bit like this adventurous prince from a Disney movie, as well as a goblin. So there are certain traits and things that I had to work into the character in this version that comes down to why he looks like he does. So to the right there, I started designing and working with some concept for what an armor could look like. This is of course much more of like this hardcore evil biker look than anything, with the iron jaw around the jaw and the skull on the shoulder and some like thick knee pads with fur on them. It's a good idea. I might return to that and make something out of it, but at this point in stage it's just a concept art. To the left here we can see some of the weapon concepts that was made for the game. To the right there are also some blades and this kind of weird axey wrench thing. There's also Chip, which has like a wintry clothing kind of approach to him up there to the very right. And to the left you can see how I thought about having upgrades. As I mentioned, they're supposed to be upgradable items, so in this case, for example, we would have the basic sword, the one to the left, and then it would slowly, as you decide to upgrade it with this pickup object, become more of a developed version that has things that are animated onto it, and there's going to be particle systems and maybe even some lightning sparks around it. We don't know. But that is the fun part about doing concept art. There is no limitations to your imagination, and then you come to the development process and you realize that there are limitations to your imagination, but that comes around that part at that end. And if you look to the left now, this is actually, the first one is actually Chip's very first concept, I think it is. How I imagine him from the start, the very get-go, when I put just down like a silhouette and come up with a character, I was not happy with how that looked. Even though I liked certain parts of the body, like he had these long arms, it was just too sci-fi for my fit. And there was this little knight down at the bottom that I kind of thought of, but then again, it really didn't have anything to do with the world of the game. There's this lock, and then to the right we have some sword upgrades, also an upgrade if you compare it to the last slide. This is an earlier version that was more in tune with the first Chip concept. If we go down here, nope, okay, so I didn't put one of those images in, but there's a concept version that Chip that actually has this sword in his hand. And as you might notice, there's like a book there as well. That book is not going to look that way, but it has a significant role in the game story. And some of the character and creatures that you're supposed to come across in this environment, and this world and environment, for example, you have these weird, almost, you have no idea what time and age they're from, skulls to the right. Some of them are built in metal. One of them has like this army cap from the 1920s. And then we have this floof on the other side. The floof, just this cute, cuddly little floof. I have no idea what it sounds like, but I imagine it to be very cute and squeak when you squeeze it. But that was also fun to make, and it just came out of nowhere, the design concept for it. Then to the left, we have this idea of a bike that Chip could be riding. At first, I thought of this one-wheeler. Now, the Riftspark that is currently in the alpha build is completely floating, and I think that aesthetic is interesting on its own because of what it allows me to do with particle systems and so forth. But on the other hand, I really do like mechanized things and motors and engines, so doing something more along the lines of what is present here in the image to the left is likely to occur when it comes to all of the other vehicles. And I say vehicles because, as I've said earlier, there's supposed to be more than one way of transportation within this game, but exactly why, I'm not going to reveal now. It's going to come at a later point in date. There's like this water thing down at the bottom that sprinkles water around the garden that Chip is supposed to have on his front lawn. And there's some documents and concepts up there how like a book could be made with bones if it was supposed to be animated and stuff like that. And some concept up there to the left. Interesting. So I'm not going to talk too much about these, but these are portal designs that I think is one of the very earliest part of a Riftspark. The portal designs tie together with what a rift is, and if you're not familiar with the word rift is basically like imagine a crackle of energy that has no real reason to be in a certain location. It's like this travel gate between dimensions or parts of a world. It's basically a gate in a way, and the rift itself is not going to be as flushly designed as in this case, where it's a very open, clear portal that has this portal structure around it. There's going to be a structure, but it's going to be so much different. And by saying this, I do reveal a bit of what the game is going to be like. But it's just fun to show you how I've thought about how some of these could animate. For example, you see this stony tip to the left that grows out of the earth, and then there's two of them, and there's like this portal in the middle that appears. There's equal designs on the other side and such. But yeah, there is a lot to say about the rifts that I'm gonna have to come back at in a future update, where you actually get to see the actual rifts and how they're supposed to work and be in an environment. And there is a little brief look at some of the terrain design up to the left, some roads I've drawn and tried to look at how I'd like the actual terrain to feel and look in the end version. And that is very likely to be the case. Also some ideas about how to do with the foliage, that the grass would kind of bend out from the rest of the grass when close to a road, so it feels a bit more alive. Some ideas about how platforms could be animated from the ground, some zone layout with like a start location in the center. There are just these weird sprinkled about concept arts that I'd like to bring together in this video to show you how much thought has gone into this process and what has been developed from the early part of January till now. Even though some of these concepts may look really dull, they are just but one of many pictures from one document that contains a lot of them, but I thought that these were the least revealing ones, and thus I decided to show you them. And in this case, there is a bit of a reveal, because the very first image there to the left was this concept art of how this mill would be located there in the background, where Chip is living, and there would be the ocean. And then when I started looking at the very concept for the mill itself, started to develop the mill, I decided I wanted to go with a different look for it. So the actual mill design that is going to be present in the game is the one to the right. So yes, I have revealed what the mill is going to be like, but luckily it's not going to have a huge impact on the game itself. It's just a fun aesthetic to show off. But up the left of that image to the right, you can also see some of the components and how I thought about it, how this wheel was going to animate around it, how the rooster on the pin was going to animate, and how it was going to be located on this little fan that sits on the very far end of the mill. And all of these thoughts has to be put together as well, like what do I want this to feel like when it's in the environment? And it is super fun when you actually get to bring that alive. And then to the left here we have some of the textures for flowers and such that's been made and currently put into the scene. You have the cacti, for example, down at the left, and to the right you have some wooden plank concepts, and this, I think it's the roof texture for the Finkelspar mill. Yes, it's the same one. So that's the texture I made when I started decorating the roof for the mill in Photoshop afterwards, putting it together in, let's see, I built it in 3D Studio Max, I think. Yes, the mill is built in 3D Studio Max, and it's animated via script in Unity. I also made a version I made it in Maya, but yes, I animated Unity for obvious reasons. For those of you who know how a 360 degrees rotation works in an animation, you'll realize why. But yes, with that said, let's take a look into the 3D development. So in this section, I'm going to take a very brief look at just some meshes. There are 3 slides. I'm going to be as quick as possible about them, because as much as there is to say about 3D development and as much as I'd like to say, there isn't too much that I can actually say that's going to bring you any meat and the bones. So if we look to the left here, it's just the early version of Chip, and then to the right you have this rendered version of him, and then you have his texture map to the right beside that. And that is what actually Chip looks like if you were to flatten him out on a surface and tell all of his body parts that you're supposed to have that thing over there on you and look like that. But that is what it looks like. And when you make a texture like that, you have to think of what you want the characters to be like in the end. Are any significant areas of the character more important? In this case, for example, you can notice that the head area, like the head, if you are able to figure out what the head is on the thing to the right, that it's a bit small for the resolution you'd usually like to have on a face. So in the new version of Chip, I decided to try to put more effort into his face. And as you can see there to the left, also made this overhauling part where I showed how I developed Chip in terms of the mesh part by part and compared it to the old one. And then with the early textures I had for him, you also have a final design. In the middle, there are some images taken, scrambled, like, not scrambled, but they're gathered from a bit all around the game. It's some like the early development assets, and some of them are from Maya. You can see, for example, the gray image down to the right in the central image. It's with the actual components of control ship. We're going to go into that in the animation section, so don't worry about it, we'll get that soon. And then to the right, I tested out some different color combinations for his skin, because I wasn't certain that I wanted him to be this green goblin from Spider-Man. No, but the green goblin, he could likewise be these different other colors, maybe due to effects by the environment and such. But I wanted to play around and see what I came across, and if anything felt better than something else. So that's that. And then when it comes down to the environment design, because of those of you who have seen the alpha zone was developed like this. I drew a map on in Photoshop, and then I brought it into 3ds Max, and then I cut away certain parts of the map that was supposed to be certain levels of terrain. Then I brought them apart, and then I started putting these meshes together into an environment by raising ground in certain areas. And all of these individual polygons, for those of you who know, to 3D, has been drawn out one by one, piece by piece, and that is a tidy work, especially when you try to think of a thing in size scale to a character. How would that one polygon, if I brought that vertex up, feel if I ran over it? And for those of you who don't do 3D, that segment just hopefully passed by your ears anyway and didn't make too much sense. But what it ends up looking like is when I put down the very early texture version then for the environment, when I just painted out some basic colors like a flat green, a flat brown, and a flat light brown, where certain things were supposed to be in an alpha environment, I started to get an idea of what the environment was going to look like. And this is actually when the game started to become a bit more fun to look at and be in. Because until this point I've had certain textures on blocks, and now I have this environment I could play around with and try out physics and interactions. And as well, for the people who are testing the alpha, it's decent, but the resolution on the ground, for example, is way too low. It's only placeholder, and this entire terrain was only made for the alpha, so it's not going to be in the final game. But it was a fun way to try to compose a scene and see how the assets came together, and I think it did quite well. And then one of my favorite things has to be the water shader that I made in another project this autumn, that I then brought into this project by upgrading the script for it. I really love water shaders, and this one is especially great because I decided to utilize the reflection that is usable in Unity, so that anything that stands side by it is actually getting reflected in the water if you look through a certain angle. So if I were to bring the camera down there, I could see Chip from the left mirrored into the water, and that is absolutely great. But with that said, it's time to go into animation, and in this part of the video we're gonna jump into Unity first, and then we're gonna take a look in Maya, and I hope I'll see you there. Right, so now we're in Unity. I'm not going to go through the rest of what's in this project due to a lot of different reasons, but the main reason is because we're focusing down on animations, and there is a lot to say just about them in themselves. So if I were to go into any of the other details, there would be a lot to talk about that would bring this video way too far. And I'm also not sure that I want to reveal all of the things that I have hidden in this project for obvious reasons as well. So with that said, when we look at the character, if I click the play character up here, you might notice that Chip, who's standing up here in this view right now with a different texture, that for those of you who played far enough in the alpha knows that he's going to get. I'm not going to tell you what it is for or why it's there, but if you notice, he's standing as a T, and the T pose is the basic pose that an animator uses when he initiates a character into the skinning process when you've made a skeleton, due to the fact that if you're standing in a T, a regular humanoid character standing in a T, the shoulders deform in a much more natural way, and that's one of the reasons to why you build them like that. And since the legs aren't supposed to spread straight wide out and stuff like that, and they're going naturally straight down when you're standing upright, it's just a natural way to put the character together in 3D before you put your rig inside of it. So a good animation file is one that's been exported like this, that has many animations baked into the same file. You may notice when I'm opening this folder that I have a few animations. One of them, for example, the bike, is just this one animation on the file, and that is also something that is different to when making placeholder animations compared to the final ones. When you make placeholder animations, you just make an animation, you put it into the project, and you try it out, and you see if it works, and if you like it, you might make a better version of it, or a temporary version stays in for as long as you're okay with it until you get tired of it and you want to have the final asset because we're getting close to release or something like that. But yes, as I said, all of the animations that are in here are placeholders, but I've still tried to put enough time and effort into them to look somewhat decent. So for example, you have the bike animation here. You can see there are some things that are moving. The hair is not moving, you know, in a logical way, but it's at least doing something. The ears are moving in a somewhat logical way. Look at the motion. And it's there to kind of like bring Chip alive a bit when he's supposed to sit on ride the bike. If we go up to the other one, we have idle animations, for example, when he's standing still on the ground like that, and then he is just standing still on that one, and this one I think he's turning to the left. Yeah, he's turning to the left and just looking over the shoulder a bit. And in this one, he's doing the thumbs up. I really enjoy that for no obvious and apparent reason whatsoever. And as I was developing these animations, I kind of set the time to myself. Each animation shouldn't take longer to make than around half an hour to an hour. Because if I were to put more than an hour into an animation, you can count for yourself if there is around 40 animations made already, and only a few of them who are actually present in the game, how many animations in terms of hours that would have been going into this project, and how many hours that has been wasted and put into the bin with that, and all of the animations that haven't been, you know, decided as final. Well, none of them are, but hasn't even been decided to have been put into the game in the first place. So yeah, I just wanted to get that out of there. But how the animations work then in Unity? Well, you need an animator, and an animator, if we go into animations, this is a little animator component, and it opens up this window right here. Let me just click on one of Chip's animations. Okay, anyways, so the animator is what kind of tells the animations when to play and why to play. And then you can use scripts to say to the animator, okay, this thing has now occurred, play your thing or do your thing, or this is supposed to happen in you. Let's say, for example, that one of my scripts tells the animator that Chip is riding a bike. Then the animator knows if he's standing idle, then he's supposed to jump into sitting on the bike. So he's then jumping into the Riftspark default. And in other cases, other things apply. For example, in this case, it's the faint idle. And the faint idle is the last part of the animation when Chip is actually just lying on the ground. And if I were to grab this animator, so you can just see that it's just Chip lying on the ground. This blue thing right here is that clip. So he's just lying on the ground. Nothing is happening whatsoever. And that then loops over itself until the game is closed. Or you decide to respawn or go back to the menu as it's currently made in the game. But if we're to look at the chain from faint to faint and idling after that, you fall down to the ground. And it's a decent animation enough for what it's supposed to be like. I think it's one of the ones that I put the most time and effort into, try to get as like feeling as rigid as possible, as realistic as possible with the little that was given. Because it's a quick animation, so there weren't much detailed information that had to be in the clip itself. Thus I had more time to put into weights and stuff like that. So, you know, as I said, half an hour to an hour. And we have other states as well here in, for example, the attack head over swing going into fall animation. It looks a bit weird, but that is also due to the fact that that animation itself is not necessarily supposed to be able to go into Chip falling in any kind of circumstance. And the falling animation is also a placeholder, so they look weird because they haven't been composed to work together. And that is also one of the icky nickies with having placeholder animations. Yes, they bring the scene into life, but they also come with the backdrop of it doesn't feel really that nice, or doesn't really look that trustable. And this is one of the reasons. Now, with that said, I think it's about time we jump into Maya and take a look at what it's actually like animating somebody, or Chip in this case, with controllers, and exactly what it looks like, and like how weird it is, and how much you have to take into consideration when you're doing it. I'm not going to go into skinning and such, but yeah, let's jump into Maya and I'll see you there. Right, so welcome into Maya. This is where all the fun goes down. Well, some of the fun and some of the less fun. The less fun part is to do what has already been done on this character, which is setting up and rigging the mesh. This fun part, however, is animating, and it might look complicated at first, but animating is actually really, really, really fun and rewarding when you get it down. In this animation, we have the chip death animations. If I jump here, you can see, for example, he's already lying down on the ground. And I'm gonna just go over briefly what these things do. For example, this ring right here that you might look at and go, well, what in the name of everything that is holy is this ring? I'm just gonna size up that scale tool for a second. This ring right here is a joint, and from the joint goes a bone to the next joint in a joint chain. This ring right here, however, is a controller. It's something that I put there so I can easily access the joint without having to click on the joint itself and make it do things. So if I were to hide joints here in the hierarchy, you can see now that I don't see any bones. And this is how I would work with the character when I'm actually animating him. So by clicking this, I can drag and move his arm around. But what I'm actually doing is I'm telling this object to tell the joint to change into the orientation that I'm bringing down with my rotation tool. No, that's not a good movement. Chip, stop doing that. But yes, so that is the very simplistic parts of how you animate. You click on these controllers that you put out and you bring them to certain locations, and they make the character do things, like he's doing a weird thing with his legs, and he can do a jumpy thing also, which is a Swedish word for also. I'm not sure why I managed to say that. I think I got so excited by it that I started talking Swedish for no obvious reason whatsoever. But yes, so when it comes down to the animation, you click and drag these, and whenever you drag something, you can see there are some red markers down here in the little timeline. What these are is they are keys that I set down to say, well, between this timestamp and this timestamp, move and do this with this object. And then when clicking S and having this object selected and being at the new timestamp with the new transformations, which then includes scaling, rotating, and moving in the space of the editor, I can tell it to save that and that location so that this position right here knows that it's supposed to travel to that new location and that new orientation. And then it's told to do that again and again and again a few times. And as you notice now, the hip is actually not moving for the rest of the animation. It doesn't have to. I could animate it, but the rest of the body does the rest of the motion quite well, and he doesn't really need to bounce anymore in his arse. So that is why Chip has only those 4 main animation keys. And if I were to do the animation properly, like I said, I would have made another bounce on the hip as well, but I thought that the rest of the body would do just enough. You're not really going to notice that the hip is not bouncing. Like, if it were to do, it would just bring a little bit more sense of motion into your animation. But getting that right is an hour, or not really an hour, but it's another few minutes just to try to tweak that in. So when trying to develop quick animations, you can't put too much time and effort into it. And the reason why I'm taking so much time putting this video together is that I feel like this project itself deserves that for the time and effort I put into it, since I have to put it aside for a while now, doing my thesis work, so that I get that done in my master's degree now later down in spring. But this is how it works, basically. Each and one of these different components are telling different body parts to do certain things, and as you notice, I've told Chip, for example, to look over his shoulder when he's falling down, and then he comes down like this. He's still looking at his shoulder because at this point he's fainted, so his eyes are a bit stiff, more stiff. And then as it does the second bounce down on the ground, his eyes should close and his eyes starts to roll up into the head like that. So now he's completely tucked off. He's fainted. Whatever happened, he is not responding to any kind of input, at least. So that's the philosophy behind that. I wanted to have a quick and easy kind of faint animation that would make sense in the game at the current state. Whenever the character reaches 0 health, I want the player to be aware of the fact that, you know, Chip has no health left. He's actually fainted. So that's that in Maya. I would like to go down with a much more deep diving video at a further point in time about animations and how I think about them and how much I actually enjoy doing them. I have not studied animations, and this has to be said. The only reason to why I know about my animations is due to my girlfriend who studied animation here at the university for 2.5 years. And I had only done some very basic animation in 3D Studio Max before, and that was in 2010-ish, somewhere around that. So another 7 years pass, and then suddenly this one day, a wonderful woman comes into my life, and she gives me all of this juicy information and just documents that I could read through and get into Maya and figure out how this interface worked. I'm starting to get comfortable with it, but I would never make a mesh or an object in Maya. I would prefer to do that in 3D Studio with the experience I have. Like with all of the years of 3D Studio behind my back, it's much more comfortable for me to use 3D Studio for making meshes, and then animating them in Maya has just felt so much more accomplished now when I figured out how to do it, because I consider Maya to be better for animations than 3D Studio by a far leap. Even though 3D Studio does it decent, Maya is just so much more like fully fledged operating for actually performing animations. So that is really well one of the absolute favorite resources I've come across since I started developing Riftspark in January. Learning about these animations and becoming more comfortable with them. Now I actually work quite quickly in Maya compared to what I did before. It doesn't take me more than a few hours to put up and fully get all of the components of a character up and rigged. So I'm looking forward to putting down the bosses and stuff that's going to be in Riftspark as well, and build them up and see what they're going to be like. There's going to be some weird animations there due to how body orientations and stuff work, and how some of them are going to be constructed with their body sizes and oversized limbs and stuff like that. You never know what you're going to come across in a game, right? And there is also never really a honest way of how things are supposed to work, because what the good part about graphics is that as much as you try to convey the truth, you also lie a lot about what is actually the truth. I mean, for example, there is a lot of lying in this scene right here. For example, would it be plausible that Chip, by fainting, actually knew that he'd have to rotate his body this heavily and throw his feet up in the air to give himself that extra curve to fall over flat when he's fainted? Possibly not, but it makes for the animation and makes the animation feel a bit more alive, and it also explains why he is falling on his back. That the animation, like the legs, are following up the motion to tell you why he is falling flat on the back. However, falling flat on the back is not necessarily explained that well. You believe it to be supposed to be that way due to the way I've made the animation and how things are moving, but there is no real explanation to why he's falling on his back. Not at all. But with that said, let's jump into the next section of the presentation. Welcome into FMod, and this is also one of my absolute favorite programs. FMod is super fun to play around with for many reasons, but this is the program I'm using to put audio into the game. And there isn't many sound files currently present here because I spent so much time putting together graphics and concept art and stuff like that. But I thought that I'd at least show you sort of like what the bike, the Riftspark, is made of here in the FMod event itself, so that you kind of get a feel for how FMod works and what to expect out of a sound middleware program. So what FMod does is that it kind of works as this super simplified version of how to get sound working into a game that has these super cool tools, and it's actually free of use if you produce and sell games for less than a certain amount per year. So it's a really fun tool to get to know and learn how to use. I'm probably going to go more into details on FMod at another time if somebody's interested in that, but since there is no real interest into going into this presentation more than just showing off, I thought I'd show off now and see what there is to look at when it comes to the bike, and then if there is interest we can definitely take a deep dive into FMod in another video. But there is a lot of documentation out there, and I recommend you to try it out if you're a sound developer in any way, shape or form. So with the Riftspark, it's actually made out of two certain sounds, and one of them, I have this glass jar right here. One of them I was puffing into the jar with my lips, And in the other one, I was doing sort of the same with my tongue. The one without getting just the ticking sound. And then I put them into my sound editor, which is Ableton Live, and I've tweaked the sounds a bit, I've sped them up, and I've tried to make a solid loop. And then I decided to put them all into here with different pitches, and it started to sound a bit like this. So this is actually the sound of the Riftspark when it's in use. Could higher the volume a bit if I wanted to, but it's basically this curve in the beginning, which is completely done in here. It's a pitch modulation on one of the sound files that brings the pitch from below a certain point up above what it's supposed to be and down again, which gives this curve feel to it. And it's the same thing in the end. If I were to get off the bike, it does the same thing as it did in the beginning. It kind of runs with a small pitch up and then pitches down till it's reached the 0 point where the bike has stopped. And that happens when you get off the bike. Currently there's no animation for it in play in the game, but yes, when you get off the bike, it's supposed to go into this little cloud or something like that is supposed to happen. I don't know. It's to be shown down the line when I get to that part of the development, but currently it's just a sound that plays. It just fades out like that when you get off the bike. And in the middle, there are certain settings. Let's start the bike again. I say starting the bike, like really? I click on the button and start the bike. I could just play anywhere from, but it's fun to do that little startup. And then I have this thing called torque. And what torque does, if we look at the values in torque, is that it has this sound manipulation. So if I were to bring this value up, I'd actually scale in these different tracks and bring it to a certain point. Now we're actually only playing the very furthest down loop, as you notice here on the audio output. Just this loop we're putting. And then this is the middle one and the lowest one that we have by default in the start. So if we bring it down, we actually hear mostly the middle engine, as you see here, and the sound out, and then bring it further down. We just listen to the first one. So this is how easy that sound is, and in the final version there's going to be a lot more engine-y, like reverb to it, but it was more than enough to make the bike feel alive. Just me popping with my mouth into a glass jar and then pitching it, and suddenly we have a bike engine. I'm not sure that you would think that is a glass jar by default, but that's how sound works. Sound is really fun to play with as well, and I mean, spending all of the years I've done here at uni, let's get off bike. Like that, perfect. I've actually come across a lot of different fun ways to create sounds out of literally nothing, and the 3 years of experience I've had now with my bachelor's, it's been one of the greatest times in my life. Partially because of how much I've learned, but also because of how much I've realized about sound design itself and how really impactful it can be in a scene, in a set environment, if used correctly to convey a message or to enhance a picture or stuff like that. So that is FMod. And we've taken a look at the sound, and I think we could round this video up by just looking into the music of Riftspark, because I think that some of you might be interested in that, and I had a great ton of fun making the music. So let's take a peek at the Riftspark music. We've gotten to that point in the video when it's time to talk about the music, the one thing that everyone has been waiting for in excitement. Yay! You can actually just go to SoundCloud and listen to that. Well, in honesty though, it's worth for me mentioning that I've been heavily inspired by Banjo-Tooie, as mentioned before, and Donkey Kong 64. These games are very different in their style and aesthetics. I mean, sure, you'd think, yeah, they're low poly and they're all N64 games. All the N64 games look the same, didn't they? In a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. I feel Donkey Kong 64 is much more clunky and stiff in its gameplay experience than Banjo-Tooie is. It's much more illogical. There's certain things in the game that I definitely get disturbed by having in certain parts of the screen. However, it's a really fun game, and you can hear how much Banjo-Tooie, for example, is inspired by Donkey Kong 64 in their sound design and in their music, and it's so fun to compare these two games, but also to try to take the best out of them and combine into something else. So when I was working on the Riftspark music, I knew that I wanted it to be that one old school N64 experience that I had when I was a kid, and try to bring that alive again, but without having the sound and audio libraries that they had back then, but do it something with like a slightly more modern sound to it, bit more orchestral, bit more real, even though it's still unfaked orchestra. It's, you know, the sound samples themselves should be a bit more realistic in the sound, at least enough to make it convey that the music is more modern in when it's made, and also get my own touch and flair onto it. I mean, at least it's still a tribute. It's not supposed to be a copy or a rip-off of something else. But I'm very heavily inspired by these two games, and if you haven't played them, if you can get yourself the hands on an N64 emulator, I'd recommend you do. You should be able to get Banjo-Tooie and Banjo-Kazooie, like the pre-successor to that game in the series, on the, for example, Xbox Store, I think it is available, so you can play it on the Xbox. Same thing with Donkey Kong 64. I'm not sure, actually. Donkey Kong 64 might be available, but I can't guarantee on that one. However, I do recommend you play these two games and see if you think that I've gotten somewhat close with the sound design. Some feedback I've gotten is that it's not too far off, and that makes me really happy. That means that I've managed to put my goal at a place I can actually reach towards, and I'm aiming to make that even more what's it called, alive and blooming in the end. I'm not sure if those are the words I was looking for, but I'm going to use them anyway for this video because I can't be asked to try to make it better. But with that said, I'm going to wrap up this entire hour-long presentation here around now, and thank you so much for joining and watching through it. If you want to hear the music and all of that, go to the SoundCloud page, it's linked in the description, and you can also just visit my website www.kevinvgues.com/impbyte/Riftspark, or just / I think it's portfolio, not sure, might be portfolio if it's just media or sound. One of those pages anyway. If you just visit my main page that has no / after it, just kevinvgues.com, you should be able to find enough information to get you started, at least if you want to hear or see anything that I've developed. It's my Impbyte website basically, so anything that I'm making or putting up should be up there, and to some extent accessible. If you want to try out any other games that I've been part of developing, they should be linked on one of the pages there. You can actually go and download some of them and test them out, experiences. Some of them are very small things, some of them are larger projects. That's been down at the University of Skövde, where I've been studying sound design, my bachelor's, for 3 years, and now I'm doing serious games and hopefully taking my master's after I've put my time and effort into my thesis now, since I'm putting this project aside a bit. So yeah, we'll hear more about that closer to summer, and until then, I'm wishing you the greatest and merriest spring one can have. And if you're watching this video in the future, still have a great day. See ya!